and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're clear hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Loa Boots. Start your day off on the right foot with footwear that was designed for those who stand relentlessly in the face of adversity. I wear Loa every single day, for miles on canine searches and for hours on tactical operations in inclement weather. No matter what, Loa keeps me moving. Whether you run, hike, hunt, or fight, on the streets or out in the woods, Loa has the gear you need to help you conquer whatever challenges you face. Go check out their new line of trail running shoes at Loa Boots, L-O-W-A Boots.com, and get outside for some fresh air and daylight. Loa, for those who know where they're going and won't stop until they get there.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by Manus X. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with Manus X. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com. In the immediate wake of a critical incident, we make an effort to take a deep breath and not rush to judgment. That is a hard-learned lesson because when emotions are running high and images are trickling out of a critical scene, it is really tempting to jump to conclusions. I've been guilty of it. I'm sure some other people on the internet may have been guilty of it over the years.
Never.
And just like everyone else on the internet, everyone is an expert and wants to share their conclusions that they just jumped to about what the shooter did and what the cops did, or argue details about the gun, or tell us what they would have done from their armchair. So, we here at Tactical Tangents made a point to slow roll this episode and wait for the investigations and the formal reports. Let's let the cookies bake, let's let the dust settle, and figure out what actually happened. And there are now reports from the U.S. Department of Justice, the Texas House of Representatives, and the Texas State University Alert program on the attack at Uvalde. So Mike and I worked through those reports and we tried to consolidate lessons from them and, add our analysis and our insight where we could, right? Our goal is to help you get smart fast and get smarter than the adversary fast. We always have to disclaim when we talk about a critical incident, we never want to glorify or gratify the asshole. So we're not going to. Whenever possible, we're not going to name them. But we do need to address it because not talking about it isn't working. So we need to talk about it, and specifically we need to talk about what lessons we can take from it to make sure that we make as few mistakes going into the future as we can. So I figure most of our listeners probably have a good idea of what went down at Uvalde. They've probably seen the videos. They've probably read some of the reporting on it. But I'm going to run you through the timeline as reported by Department of Justice, so the DOJ report timeline, because there are some lessons embedded in how they wrote it. I think there are some insights that we can get just knowing what happened and the order in which it happened. So, mostly quoting them, you'll hear a little bit of my verbiage as we go, but this is basically a direct quote out of the report. At 11:33 a.m. on the morning of May 24th, 2022, the subject, because we never want to name him, entered Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas with an AR-15 rifle. He immediately started shooting and within a minute entered classrooms 111 and 112. Those two classrooms were connected with an interior door, interior away from the hallway door. Within 3 minutes, which in my mind is actually pretty good, of the subject's entry into the school, 11 law enforcement officers from Uvalde School District and the separate Uvalde police departments, including some supervisors, arrived inside the school. Hearing continued gunfire, 5 of those officers, first on scene, law enforcement, ran toward classrooms 111, 112. That's where the stimulus was. That's where they went. The other 6 first on scene did not advance down the hallway. That group included the Uvalde police acting chief, Mariano Pargas, who was, per the report, in the best position to start taking command and control and to start coordinating with approaching personnel. That's what we call literary foreshadowing. One of the officers said to line up to make entry, and within seconds, shots were fired from inside one of those rooms, 111, 112. 2 officers were hit, kinda, with shrapnel or spalling. Some metal came at them, right? And all the responders retreated to positions of cover. After 3 fits and starts toward the classroom, the officers' focus shifted from entering the classrooms and stopping the shooting towards something else, toward evacuating the other classrooms, trying to negotiate, requesting additional responders and equipment. They want to do anything other than go into that classroom and end the threat. With this shift from an active shooter type scenario toward what they perceived as a barricaded subject approach, some responders repeatedly described the subject over the radio as quote-unquote barricaded or quote-unquote contained. Yet, within 4 minutes of the initial arrival, 911 dispatch confirmed that class was indeed in session and reported that they had calls from victims, i.e. there were live humans victims inside the room. The school district police chief, Chief Pete Arredondo, was in the hallway, right? And he directed officers at several points to delay making entry into classrooms 111, 112 in favor of searching for keys and clearing the other classrooms in the hallway. Occupants of the other classrooms were at risk, in their minds, of further injury as a result of the rifle bullets potentially going through the walls and from potential crossfire upon entry into the classrooms. At several points, Chief Arredondo also tried to negotiate with the subject. He kind of yelled into the classroom, "Hey, come out, let's talk."
These are innocent kids.
Yeah.
Was one of the things he was quoted as saying.
Others called out over their radios for additional resources and indicated that they were waiting for a tactical team to arrive. Something like Uvalde SWAT or the Texas DPS, which is, if you're not familiar, Texas State Police, and the U.S. Border Patrol Tactical Unit, which we will call for the rest of this episode BORTAC. Chief Arredondo became the de facto on-scene commander. He didn't have his radios. They were lost or discarded upon his arrival, and so he was communicating with everybody else either verbally or through his cell phone throughout the entire response. Over the course of the incident, overwhelming numbers of cops showed up from different agencies. They self-deployed to the school, right? Leadership on scene, however, had not established command and control, to include an incident command post, a staging area, a clear perimeter around the hallway or the school. Therefore, arriving personnel did not receive accurate updates on the situation or direction for how to support response efforts. So lots of people showed up and kind of didn't know what to do with their hands. Many arriving officers, based on inaccurate information on the scene and what was shared over the radio, or from just looking around and seeing the lack of urgency toward entering the classrooms, just believed, they assumed, that the subject had already been killed, or that Chief Arredondo was in the room with the subject. As leaders from additional law enforcement agencies arrived, including the county sheriff, Ruben Nolasco, the lack of clear communication and command structure made it even worse, right? As more and more people show up, the lack of control over those people compounds. They struggled to identify who was in charge. The ambulances that showed up to streets that were blocked by police cars, which is a recurring theme that's a lesson encountered over and over and over in many of these incidents.
Constant problem, and not even in big active shooter scenes, even smaller scale stuff.
Yep. Concerned families also showed up to the school. The longer this takes, the more people will show up. That's another recurring theme. So they showed up to the school, and they likewise had difficulty obtaining information about their loved one's status, right? You show up, where's my kid? Well, sir, stand right here and don't, just stand there. oh, okay, thanks.
Wait and wonder.
Yeah.
Strategy.
Because that's a thing I'm going to do when I'm in lizard brain mode, right? My kid's in danger. Okay. Incorrect and conflicting information was also shared via social media, with the school district posting that all students and staff were safe in the building. Fuck. And later posting messages about reunification that conflicted with what Uvalde PD was posting. So the police were saying one thing, and the school district was saying something else. At 12:21 p.m., 48 minutes after the subject entered the school, the subject fired 4 more shots inside the classrooms. Officers moved forward into a formation outside the classroom doors, but did not make entry. So after 48 minutes of waiting and hearing more shooting, they walked up to the doors and then stopped. Instead, presuming the classroom doors were locked, which at that point was an assumption, the officers tested a set of keys on the next door room, the janitor's closet. The keys didn't work. So the responders started searching for more keys and breaching tools. Chief Arredondo continued to try to communicate with the subject, while the other police chief, the city chief Pargas, continued to provide no direction, command, or control to personnel on the scene. Too many chiefs. Not enough Indians. After another 15 minutes, officers found a second set of keys and used them to successfully open the janitor's closet. That's good, except there's no one in the janitor's closet. With working keys in hand, the officers then waited to determine whether a sniper or a drone could obtain a sight of and eliminate the subject through the window. Those efforts were also unsuccessful. At 12:48 p.m., 27 minutes after hearing the additional gunshots inside the classrooms, and 75 minutes after first responders first entered the elementary school, officers opened the door to room 111, where the subject was. A team that was composed of, notably, no Uvalde PD and no Uvalde School District PD. It was composed of BORTAC members, a member of the U.S. Border Patrol Search, Trauma, and Rescue Unit, or BORSTAR unit, and deputies from 2 local sheriff's offices entered the rooms. The officers killed the subject when he emerged shooting from a closet. Welcome to Texas. The subject was killed at approximately 12:50 p.m., 77 minutes after the first officers entered the school, and 45 rounds were fired by the attacker in the presence of officers.
So there's plenty to unpack in all of this, and we're obviously not done yet. But I do want to take a minute just to put a couple things in context. First of all, Jim mentioned BORTAC and BORSTAR, and I just want, first and foremost, to give a shout out to my Border Patrol buddies. I've had a lot of opportunities to work with BORTAC and BORSTAR, and in my experience, those dudes are studs. They're very well resourced. They're very well trained. They're very proficient. And honestly, like, for the people that, especially those who don't know or haven't ever worked with them, they're probably like some of the most underrated tacticians out there. A lot of the BORSTAR paramedics that I've interacted with are right there in proficiency with like a lot of the PJs that I've interacted with. And granted, they have different missions and some different skill sets, but they're all around, those 2 teams are studs. So shout out to them if you ever get a chance to train with them, and they do a lot of collaboration all over the country. One of their big doctrine pieces is to work with local agencies, and so they do that a lot. If you have that opportunity, do it. On the flip side of that, also for context, you need to remember that we're talking about smaller agencies, right? So the Uvalde City Police Department has something, like, I Googled it, and it's like something like 40 or 45 sworn officers. It's not a very big agency. And that means there's not a lot of experience and probably not a lot of training that happens when it deals to this higher level stuff, right? Doesn't mean none, and I'm not saying that they're slackers, right? But there comes a point where an agency that small doesn't have a lot of resources and funding, and then we're going to come back to that. The other side of that is there's a lot of discussion in these reports about the school district police force prior to this event, if my Google serves me correct, that school district police department had something like 6 cops. So when we say the chief of police for the school district, like, let's keep that in context. He's the chief of police for 5 dudes or gals. So it's easy when we evaluate an incident like this to put it in terms that we understand and we know, whatever our local police agency is or whatever the big city police agency is. And you need to try to see this through the lens of a much smaller agency, and also everything that comes with that in terms of not just the staffing, but like resources, funding, training, experience, exposure, all of that. Just something to keep in mind. Yeah, and
Uvalde, I haven't spent any time there, but I've spent time in rural South Texas, is a small town. And when you have a small town, kind of everybody knows everybody. And that was a factor in this response, right? And I remember during some of the social media discussion about how this went, a couple of people defended the officers and that officer's wife was in the room. Like, how dare you question him? And it's like, yeah, but that's worse. You understand how that's worse, right? Like, if your wife is in the room, maybe try to save her.
Especially, yeah.
So I understand that sounds judgy. I get it. And I am not trying to be crass about this, but I do think it is important to pull the lessons out of it. And if a little bit of sarcasm and a little bit of humor will help us internalize those lessons, I think it's worthwhile, right? So you're going to hear that kind of throughout, right? That is how I interpret these events. So to continue on to the formal report discussion, it continues. There were 587 children and many other teachers and staff members present at the elementary school that fateful day. In the end, 19 children and 2 staff were killed, and at least 17 survivors physically injured. They don't actually know how many injuries, because partly it depends on how you define an injury. Partly, not everyone really went to the hospital, right? There's South Texas. Some people don't want to go into the hospital and be seen. You got kind of that dynamic. So I'm going to stop us right there. I have spent a lot of time going through these reports, and several different reports on this. It is not clear to me in any of the reporting how many of those fatalities had basically survivable injuries that bled out at the scene.
While the officers were in the hallway waiting.
Exactly. And we don't know, and to some extent we can't know. But I think it's safe to assume that at least some of those people may have been saved with a quicker response. So that's the thing that really should be a splinter in our brains as we're considering this.
Yeah, because you don't know if it's one thing that you don't want to go take great risk for nothing, right? There's a saying, we risk a lot to save a lot. And we're not going to put our ass on the line to go recover dead bodies, right? But if you know that there's wounded people in there and you don't know their status,
yep.
That is your exigency. Is the fact that you don't know. We know that there are wounded kids in there, and that if they are wounded, it was probably from gunfire, right? Even if we don't know what kind of weapon yet, from gunfire in this case. And that in and of itself is sort of like proof positive that you need to get in there to not only stop the killing, but stop the dying as well.
Yep. So wounded and deceased victims were transported to Uvalde Memorial Hospital, while the majority of the other victims were transported to the Uvalde Civic Center. And that was the reunification arrangement that the district set up, which was eventually established. At the hospital and the center, some families were reunited with their children. Other families received incorrect information suggesting that their family members had survived when in fact they had not. Okay. And others were notified of the deaths of their family members by personnel who were untrained in delivering news like that, right? That's a thing you really want to try to get right. And granted, worst case scenario, worst day of a lot of those people's lives. But man, this is a part of the process. You want to make every effort to make sure you get right. Public communications challenges continued throughout the response and in the aftermath of the tragedy. Both impromptu and scheduled news conferences and media engagements contained inaccurate and incomplete information. Victims, families, and the community members had a tough time getting timely and accurate information about what occurred on May 24th. And although government officials and school administrators hosted a lot of briefings and school board meetings, they kind of didn't say much, right? And there's a balance to be had there. There's a formal investigation and process. We're trying not to skew it. And also, increasingly, there was concern about they were going to get sued. And they clammed up over that. Well, here's the thing. If the community gets mad at you because they think you're hiding stuff, they're more likely to sue you. So consider that. I'm not a lawyer, but I know how humans operate, and angry humans sue a lot harder.
Yeah, good faith goes a long way.
Yep. Now, all that said, it is easy hearing all of that and watching the videos to just shake your head over such a disgraceful performance and say, it would never go that way in our agency. It could never happen here. We are not like that. I'm better than that. And man, I hope you're right. But we are in the business of closing the gap between enthusiasm and capability. And I will bet a beer that the Uvalde responders would have said the exact same thing if this had happened somewhere else. If this had happened in California or Florida or Virginia, I'll bet those Uvalde cops would have been like, man, those guys are a disgrace. We would never, here in Texas, that would never happen here. And there it happened. Okay. So I suspect there's an awful lot of fantasy thinking among a lot of people, including a lot of cops. And some of that you need, right? You need to be able to visualize how it should go. You need to have a picture in your head of how you will perform. But you have to close that gap between fantasy and reality. And you have to make sure that when that day comes, you got your game on. And that's not just I'm going to be the sheepdog and jump through the door and punch the evil in the face, which, by the way, we must be able to do. But it's also stuff like, you got to competently run the scene. You have to competently move information around. You have to competently figure out where the ambulances park. You have to competently communicate both with each other and with the community. And if you don't do that, you're going to get a worse outcome on what is already a really, really bad day. And that's what we want to fix today.
So one of the things about Uvalde, and one of the things that I've had a really hard time figuring out how to deliver when it comes to talking about this event, because it is so emotional, right? Is that I do think that we need to show some empathy for the guys and gals that responded to this event. And I don't want to do that at the slight of the victims, because I do have a really hard time with this as well, right? And on several occasions, just reading through the report, I had to close my computer and stop for a minute and just kind of like take a break, right? Because you read through some of this stuff and you see that of all of those fatalities, most of them were like 10 years old. And like there comes a point where like you risk a lot to save a lot, right? Like a 9 or 10-year-old child. I mean, think about that. A lot of 9 and 10-year-old children that were killed in this attack. And so you don't wait until you're stacked up in that hallway to reconcile that with yourself. And that's hard, because I also recognize that when you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to go in there and get them, and you're approaching a commercial metal door, a fire-rated door in a hallway of a school where there's some safety glass and windows, and the guy is going to see you coming, and you take fire through the door and you don't have the skills or the equipment to breach that door, it's real easy to be like, I'm going to go get them. But like, you can only kick and scream so much while you're getting shot at in the doorway to be effective. So like, this is tough. And so back to the victims, some of the 911 calls that came in from that classroom were a 9 and 10-year-old child saying, help, help, help. I don't want to die. My teacher is dead. One of my teachers is still alive but shot. There is a lot of dead bodies. Now, if you're standing in that hallway, you might not get the full impact of those words. But certainly you've thought about a school shooting before, and the day that might come that you're called to deal with this sort of thing. And like Jim said, in terms of like closing that gap between enthusiasm and capability, you better have some idea, because I don't know how I would live with myself if there were bleeding out 9 and 10-year-olds in that room and I was not taking like forward action and moving in there and dealing with it, right? So that being said, I've been fortunate in my career. I don't know if you could call it that, because there's some trauma and baggage that probably comes with it, but I consider myself privileged and fortunate to have experienced a lot of things. I've been in scenarios where we were getting shot at, and lots of incidents where bullets were flying, and we had to make difficult decisions about, do we stay or do we go? I mean, I've had some exposure to that. I've also been fortunate to be involved in a lot of situations where we were breaking things. I've helped bad guys out of their houses enough times that I've gotten the opportunity to break a lot of doors. And so I can go into something like that informed with that experience. But with that, one of the things that experience tells me is that getting through a door like that, if it is locked, that's the big asterisk in here, and we'll come back to that later. But one of the big things in that is like, if that door is locked, getting through there without tools and even with just rudimentary, like really basic tools, is going to take a lot of work. You're going to be standing there for a while, making a lot of noise and a lot of ruckus and drawing a lot of attention. It's not an easy problem. So for agencies that are in these small remote areas, they don't have a lot of funding or resources or training or exposure. Their call volume is low. They just don't know what they don't know. And you can't learn all this stuff on YouTube. You can't learn it in a PowerPoint, right? It's stuff that you got to get out and do. And I do think that we need to show a little bit of empathy for the people that deal with this sort of problem, but not in an empty way. Be empathetic, but let that inform what we do going forward, and that is to find practical solutions to help them figure out what to do instead of just stand there in the hallway when they need to be taking action, right? So I hope I deliver that in a way that is balanced, right? Like, I don't want to do any discredit to the victims, because that doesn't sit okay with me. But I also understand that, like, this is a difficult problem if you're in that hallway. It's not as straightforward. It's easy to say, oh, well, I would just. It's like, yeah. Yeah, but if you haven't been there, it's a lot easier to say than it is to do at times. So I want to add a little bit of editorial on some of the things that come up in this. There was a lot of discussion in these reports about the incident command stuff, like command and control. A command post wasn't established. A staging area wasn't established. All these chiefs were there and no one started directing resources and things like that. And that's fair. Those things are important in terms of trying to organize a response like this. It's a lot harder than it looks, especially when there's different agencies and you have communications problems, which is always the case in things like this. But one of the things that I think we need to make sure that we embrace when we hate on the lack of command and control is that need for decentralized command. we need to make sure that responders fundamentally understand what it means to find work and to not have to sit around and wait to be told what to do. That being said, from a leadership perspective, and a lot of this is hard because post-Ferguson, we've conditioned cops to take less action, and we've inspired supervisors and commanders to micromanage people because we're trying to mitigate or dictate outcomes. And that's just not practical, right? And so the problem is, from a leadership perspective, if you try to micromanage this, like it's too much for one person to tackle. So you can't expect, as that commander, if you're a leader, right? If you're the person that shows up and it's on you to take charge, like, you need to assume that you can't just be the conductor and dictate everything that's going to happen, right? You need to have that balcony view approach where you have to assume that people have their own initiative and they're going to do their own individual efforts, and you need to try to sync those up and find some harmony, right? And one of the ways that you do that is by delegating tasks and not methods. So you don't need to tell people how to do their job. You just need to say, like, I need you to go set a perimeter around this. I need you to establish a staging area for ambulances. I need you to go clear the parking area, right? Clear the path for medical to move in. Give them a task. Don't necessarily tell them the method. Let them figure that out. And that's something that you need to build into your day-to-day. That's not just something that you wait for the big shit show, like your Super Bowl, to figure out how to do that. People need to have initiative and be able to take charge of their own actions, right? And we have to embrace that kind of like decentralized command stuff. The one thing that you can do as a leader or a commander in a situation like that, in terms of providing clarity to your people, is identifying clearly what the objective is. Stop the killing, stop the dying. There's nothing more important than getting into that room and eliminating this guy so that we can start to get these people help, right? If you're clear about that and you can make sense of it in everyone's head that that is the objective, then that goes a long way. So what we have to watch out for is, like, all these individual efforts that happen, all these individual officers arrive on scene, and everyone's doing their own thing, and there's not necessarily that harmony, right? People don't synergize their efforts. So I can think of situations that I've been in with my SWAT team where if I see that so-and-so, like I see, hey, you know, Joe or Bob or whoever is doing X, and I saw that they were handling that task, and so I did Y. That's the kind of stuff, that's the mentality that you want people to have. And this is especially true when you have things like communications and radio problems. And it comes up in every active shooter event, every major incident, right? Is recognizing that you are not going to be able to have explicit communication about everything that occurs. So what we need is clarity for what the objective is, a common operating picture or a shared consciousness about what's occurring, right? Everyone has this impression of what the situation is as it stands. And to that end, one of the things that came up in this event is, as people started trickling on scene, there was that, like, well, it wasn't really operational momentum. It was kind of the lack of operational momentum, where it started slowing down and being treated like this hostage barricade containment problem. And everyone just kind of went with that, right? Everyone was like, okay, well, if that's the case, then we can just kind of slow down and mill about and wait for something to happen that changes things. And so that operational momentum, or in this case, a lack thereof, right? There's again that that lack of common understanding. The shared picture is not lining up with reality, right?
Well, yeah, they had a shared picture probably, right? They kind of followed along. Sure. They show up and everyone else is kind of milling about. I guess I'm supposed to mill about, right?
Right.
And that shared picture was completely detached from what was actually happening in the room.
Fair, right. There was a mismatch between reality and that. And I guess that's kind of where I'm going with that, is that sometimes, like, you need that outside look. You need someone else to show up who's a little bit removed from the problem and start challenging assumptions, asking questions, going through the what ifs, confirming or dispelling the information that you have. And if people are in a rut trying to identify that and then take action, right? Develop contingencies. And that's kind of the key in that, is making sure that we don't get stuck there.
I like that. One thing that I think the DOJ report did really well was acknowledging that, well, the school district chief, Arredondo, who has taken a lot of heat over time, right? Because he was the guy on camera that you see in the news, that although he was the de facto on-scene commander and was running things in the hallway, he had taken command of the hallway. The city PD chief was like outside the building and absolutely could have set up a command center and integrated the pictures from inside the hallway and outside the hallway and the phone calls to dispatch, and didn't. And by the way, remember that thing about Chief Arredondo's radios? He didn't have one. So you had a disconnected command and control node, and that's bad. It's hard to command and control anything when you can't communicate. In fact, in the military, we don't call it C2 if we can help it. We call it C4 ISR, command, control, communications, collaboration, whatever the hell else, and intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, right? And the reason why we talk about it, one, we like giant, stupid acronyms, but also we understand that we're trying to build a common picture, and it's not enough for the commander to have that picture. Everybody else has to have it. And if some outlier gets some piece of the puzzle, he needs to get that quickly to the commander. And if he can't communicate, you're kind of paralyzed. And you've got to be prepared to adjust when that happens. So if we're not hearing from the boss, who's in charge? Okay, you're in charge. What should we do, boss? Right? Or this is what I think we should do, boss. Let's go do it.
Yeah, so building on the command and control stuff in terms of who's in charge, what's the objective as it relates to communication, recognizing that those individual or independent efforts, we're trying to harmonize those. And commanders and leaders need to recognize that there are times where someone else on the ground might have better and more actionable intelligence than they do, right? And so they really need to push out that idea that, hey, you have initiative. If something needs to be done, then I expect you to either do it or like speak up, right? We really want to encourage people at lower levels, if they have something actionable, to take charge if necessary. It might not be effective for the guy in the hallway, whether he's a chief or otherwise, to be the one that's calling the shots. It may take somebody else who's getting information another way. One of the ways that you can do that, just as a common thing that is being taught to a lot of the active assailant thing, is in terms of communication, if you have actionable intelligence, is with an acronym called LCAN. LCAN stands for location, conditions, actions, and needs. This is a very, very easy way to get out kind of your a report of the situation that is in front of you and essentially take charge. If you think that you have something that, you can make a difference, LCAN is a good way to try to communicate or establish that, right? So an example, I'm at the western hallway outside of room X. I've got a shooter locked in a classroom with several victims, and this is assuming that the door is locked, right? I've got a shooter locked in a classroom with several victims. There's a commercial door. We're preparing to make entry. I need entry tools and a shield. It's pretty brief, pretty concise. Okay, I know the conditions that they're facing. I know what they're about to do. I know where they're at, and I know what their needs are. Now, in this particular event, there was some discussion about whether or not the door was actually locked, if the guy locked it when he went in there behind him, or, he went through an unlocked door, so it was presumed probably that it was still unlocked and that they could have gone in right through the door. So that's part of it. But you might need to look at, speaking of, again, having that initiative and looking for other ways, is there another way you can get in? They were looking at ways they can get in. They can get a sniper shot through a window or eyes on with a drone. Maybe they go through the windows, break the windows, right? Whatever you have to do to make that happen. One of my favorite tools is called a SWAT rock, patent pending. You just find a big old river rock or something that you can put through a window. It makes a great breaching tool. And if nothing else, if you know, speaking of synergy and harmony, if you know that those guys are about to make entry and they're going to be working that door and trying to make a bunch of noise, maybe you start throwing rocks at the windows to divert the guy's attention towards the windows. So those are considerations to take. They were asking for shields in this, and the video shows them carrying shields.
And you can hear it in the audio, right? If you listen to their discussions, because a lot of it got captured by body-worn camera, they were very, very concerned with the fact that they were up against a rifle. Just the fact of being up against the rifle was like, oh my God, the whole situation's changed because there's a rifle. Well, gosh, it's 21st century. An awful lot of active shooters are going to have a rifle. They don't all, but enough of them do. You got to assume that, right? And in their mind, because they were in soft armor, which, as I understand, almost all cops always are, right? In soft armor, they were not comfortable in the armor they had, and they needed a hard shield in front of them. As far as they were concerned, that was the thing they must have to get through that door. And so they talked about it over and over and over. What they didn't do was do something about it. In 77 minutes, they didn't do something about it.
Yeah, some little things about shields, and without like deep diving that right here and now, one of the big problems with the shield is that it really only protects the person carrying it. In spaces like that, anyone but the guy holding the shield is going to be exposed, and so a lot of times it just becomes cumbersome and gets in the way. So there is a false sense of security, I think, that comes with shields, and you need to kind of adjust your tactics accordingly. But if you had to manually work a door like that, you're using like breaching tools, a ram, a Halligan, you're using basically like a sledgehammer, pry bar, crowbar, something like that to try to get through, and this guy's shooting at you through the door, then putting a shield up against the door to give them time to work it, yeah, that could work. That can help, right? And at that point, like, it's one thing to say, well, we want to do it for safety. I mean, nothing is safe about this situation. You're going to have to accept some risk, right? But also, if you're trying to open the door and you get shot in the progress, what do you not necessarily get done? Open the door. So there is something to say just about the efficacy of, if a shield buys you some time to work the door better, it could have some value. And then if you are taking fire, like if the guy is shooting right at the doorway on your way in, and you've got one dude with the shield that can just push his way through and take the brunt of that so that dudes can get out left and right around him, there is some value in that. I would offer just that you need to have a really, really clear use of whether or not it's helping or hindering you, because it will slow you down a lot. And I'm not saying that they're not valuable. We use shields all the time, but just factor that in. And waiting around for it, I mean, I was on a call one time that sounded a lot like an active shooting kind of thing, and it was, but the guy was inside his own apartment just cranking rounds kind of indiscriminately. He wasn't targeting people. Everyone was hunkered down and sheltered in place. We didn't know that until we got there, but there was a point where officers were like, go get me a shield from the station. And I was responding to this like, yeah, I'm not waiting for someone to go to the station first before we go get eyes on this problem, right? So just make sure you're kind of considering those things.
Yeah, so let's talk about doors in this context. One thing about schools is that you have some level of home field advantage. And if you're not taking advantage of that, you're doing it wrong, right? If you're in a fair fight, you didn't plan it properly. If you're a city police agency, and especially if you're a school district agency or an SRO, you have almost total ability to set the playing field. So let's do that. Let's stack the deck. Do you have keys? If not, why not? Does the school have a bag of very clearly marked keys that they can hand responding officers as they get there? If not, why not? Is it a budget thing? Really? You can't afford keys? I'll bet we can. Okay. Do you, and does everyone in the agency, know the details on the doors? Which way do they open? Are they pryable? Do they have any weak spots? Can you attack the hinges? Like, have you been on both sides of the door and really looked at that door? Do you have a spare door of that same make and model that you can practice on? If not, why not? Well, gosh, doors cost money. Yeah, that's true. but relative to other things, maybe not that bad, right? Also, we teach cops to be scared of doorways, right? Fatal funnel. Don't hang out in the fatal funnel. Okay, that's good. But that's also like lesson 1 of many lessons. You also have to teach cops what to do about doorways beyond just being scared of them. And Mike might be able to get into more detail on that. I'm not a breacher. I don't stack up on doors. I look at doors from airplanes. But if the only lesson you take from your tactical training is oh my god, doors scary, there's more. There's more to learn, right? Similar concept to the doors is the cameras. Most schools these days have cameras. Do you have a way to see what the cameras see? If not, why not? And there's different levels of sophistication on that, different levels of connectivity, and maybe you can port it back to the police station. Maybe you can port it to ideal would be the on-scene commander is able to see it on a tablet. But you got to do something. And why not take advantage of the installed surveillance and reconnaissance capability that you have? So try to do that. Stack the deck in your favor. Another thing came up was there was this kind of funny, not funny. There was this
Situation.
Dynamic. Awkward dynamic between the cops and the procedure that the school did. So most schools in the country do some variation of a lockdown when they think they have an active shooter. I personally think that that's problematic. I think the national doctrine is run, hide, fight. So they should be doing run or hide or fight. Lockdown is sometimes a valid procedure, right? If there's some crisis happening across the street from the school, I think it makes sense to lock down. If there's a medical event and you need to get the kids out of the hallway so the paramedics have a clear path, okay, fine, that's a lockdown. What I don't want to do is have everyone sit there and be good little victims while somebody with a gun comes through and mows them down. I really, really hate that as a tactic. But until I get the whole world on board with run, hide, fight, the national doctrine, here we are. Okay. So the school did that. The neighboring classrooms did that. They shut off the lights, locked the doors, and hid. And they were so effective that many of the responding cops got it in their heads that the school was closed that day.
Oops.
So the school, doing the tactic that they were taught to do, effectively tricked the cops. Did it trick the shooter? It didn't appear that way. So the whole point of that lockdown procedure and turn off the lights and hide is ideally you trick the shooter. The shooter walks down the hallway, doesn't have anything to shoot. He wastes time messing with the doors, and by that time the cops get there and clack him, right? That's the goal of lockdown. Well, the problem was he got into a classroom where he had victims stuck in his own little personal kill zone, and so the officers sitting in the hallway didn't even realize there were kids hiding in the classrooms they were stacked up on. So they had their own little OODA loop where they were looking into the windows, and it looked like the rooms were occupied. And so they led themselves to believe that the shooter was in a more or less unoccupied classroom. I don't even know what to tell you about that. I don't even know.
Yeah, and generally, like if you're responding to this sort of thing, you're moving to stimulus or other indications. I mean, they did see things like powder from the drywall in the air. They smelled gunpowder. They could see shell casings. They had things that they can follow.
They heard 48 shots, right?
Right. Well, I'm saying
in the report.
In addition to the gunfire, in the moments that there was a lull in the gunfire, they had something that they can sort of, key in on.
45 shots, just to be clear.
But the key in this is, one is I think we just have to recognize the difference between the decision-making, the OODA loop orientation of the people responding to this sort of thing and the people at the school, right? So
And the bad guy, right? You got
and the bad guy.
sets of OODA loops.
And the parents and the victims, right? Like you have a bunch of 9 and 10-year-olds. Do they understand the procedures as well? I mean, there's a whole lot that goes into that, right? But periodically, people will get this great idea in their mind that they're going to go prepare a school for this kind of event, and they'll go put up a bag together that has spare keys. They're marked with all the classrooms. They've got information and maps and blah, blah, phone numbers and whatever. And those things sit in a closet somewhere, and a couple years go by and locks get changed, and oh, here's the login to the cameras, but you have to be logged onto the Wi-Fi, and we got a new server, and we didn't change. We had to update the password, and I mean, it's just. And now you extrapolate that to every district, every school in the district, every district in the city or the county, and then you have multiple agencies. How do you get everyone on board? Jim mentioned getting doors to practice on. Well, gosh, even on a pretty well-resourced SWAT team, it's hard for me to get doors like that I can hang and practice breaching on, let alone do it for everyone in the agency. Getting a door to practice on is not going to do my entire department a whole lot of good in terms of learning how to get through a door like that, right? And so lockdown procedures is another example of this, where we need to condition the cops like what they're going to look at when they come into this, right? But also, even for the teachers and stuff, like teaching them how to recognize the challenges that we're going to have might be helpful. Maybe being ready to unlock the door is actually going to be a big deal. One of the things about this entire event, and this has come up in other ones, I think Virginia Tech, the guy chained the door closed, and that added to the body count, right? In active assailant response, especially in the aftermath of this and Parkland and some other recent events, but ever since Columbine, generally speaking, people are on the same page with what that needs to look like. And I think that's coming a long way, and it's getting even better now that we've had some of these bad outcomes. And so we've done a lot on the gunfighting front, right? We've worked on that quite a bit. But there's the practical side of all right, getting to the gunfight, you have to locate the gunfight. We did a regional. Right now, we have a circuit of regional active assailant training happening at my agency and the surrounding agencies, where they're getting everyone from all the local agencies to go through it. And it's just a one-day kind of update on active assailant response stuff. And one of the drills that they do that I actually really liked was they've got a guy with AK blanks that starts moving. You're not moving to the bad guy and shooting. You're just in a large building, and they've got a guy fire a couple rounds. And the exercise is essentially hey, move in the direction that you think it's coming from. And then when you lose your sense of direction, stop. And then we'll do a couple more. So you can kind of see what it sounds like and learn how, in a building, is it upstairs or downstairs? Is it left? Is it right? It's going to echo. It's going to do all these things. And I thought that was a really good and useful drill, because it's not something that you get to experience very often. So that's cool. Locating the gun, we're doing a good job teaching gunfight, right? Go get in the gunfight. That's cool. You got to find it first, though. And that's sometimes easier said than done. And then
ISR, right? If they got cameras, leverage the cameras.
Yeah. And then when you find it, you got to get into it. And so, what we're not doing, what we talk about sometimes, but we don't do enough of, is breaching and teaching people how to open doors, right? To force through doors.
One of my favorite Mike-isms is this a SWAT problem or is this a patrol problem? The assumption, I think, in a lot of departments is, well, yeah, SWAT does the breaching, right? Except, how long does it take to get SWAT on scene versus how long does it take patrol to get on scene, right?
Right, and it's one of those fantasy things of, we've got patrol guys out there that, I put a battering ram or a sledgehammer in my car, and in case I got to breach a door. It's one of them commercial doors like that, I'm telling you right now, I've seen some very skilled and very strong breachers really struggle with doors like that. It's not as easy as it looks, unless you've got either a shotgun or explosives. Then it becomes a lot simpler.
So resources are tough, and this is a recurring theme, and I'm going to hit on it later, is do you think maybe someone from the community could donate a goddamn door? Like there's the movie Pentagon Wars. They're like, do you know how much a door like that costs? He's like, I'll buy the army a new goddamn door. Like that's how I feel here in this story.
The trick is you might not need just one. You might need a lot. And then you've got to mount it somewhere. And everywhere you're going to mount it, you're going to break.
Yep.
So like it does become taxing for sure. I'm not saying
it's easy. I'm saying we got to do it.
Right. And that's the thing is I'm not discrediting that either.
Yeah.
But we do need to talk more about it because experience really, really matters. And I think it's a neglected area when it comes to dealing with this kind of problem. The movies show people like shooting through locks and stuff. And it's it's an option. I'm not going to say I'm not going to do it. And I've done it. We use shotguns to open doors and stuff. But if you think you're going to use like a pistol or a rifle and do it, it's a lot harder than it looks. Even with a purpose-built shotgun, it's a little harder than it looks. So it's a thinking person's sport. It takes a lot of strength. It's bronze and brains for sure. The only thing I'll throw in there otherwise for the sake of this episode is like power tools, sawzall, chainsaws, stuff like that. Go through the wall, maybe. The fire department carries stuff like that. You might be able to, cheat and steal your way to get some of that stuff and something like this. But anyway, I just wanted to make the point about breaching and how difficult that can be and how significant it is in a problem set like this.
So this has come up throughout this episode is the resourcing that a police department has, right? And I am very aware, not a cop, but very aware of the fact that resources are always a consideration. And I work at various times, I've worked in chunks of the military where we had all the money. We had GWAP money that was paying for things, or Joint IED Defeat money that was paying for all the things. So I know what it's like to be rich on that, and I know what it's like to be really, really poor when it comes to resourcing. Every agency on Earth believes that it is underfunded and undermanned. Your agency is underfunded and understaffed. I'll bet $1. Okay? The Navy SEALs will tell you they are underfunded and understaffed. And it's probably true, right? Your agency, whether it is a busy Metro PD or a rural sheriff's office, probably has a lot more calls than it can handle with the people and money that it has. And you probably don't get the training that you need or the time that you need to do that training. I get it. And you have to triage where you put your constrained time, your money, and your effort. And we have to be realistic about where school attacks fall on the scale of probability and severity, right? This is a risk management thing, and it's tough. But we don't get to just throw up our hands and admire the problem. Be like, oh, well, yeah, we're poor. School shootings happen. Nothing we can do about them. Screw that mindset. I'm not a fan of that mindset. Apathy is not what we're here for, right? We got to figure out a way. What it means is we have to get creative and we have to mitigate this where and how we can. So we don't get to just throw our hands up. We got to be sneaky bastards and figure out a way to do some things to help stack that deck. A lot of the screw ups at Uvalde could have been prevented with a CPX or TTX. It's military's for a command post exercise or tabletop exercise. You get all the agencies, all the stakeholders, the school district, EMS, the fire department. You sit them all in a room. And you start out with just the senior leaders, and then you get the lower level commanders, and then sometimes you get the fielded forces, right? And it costs you basically nothing. It costs you time, right? You got to sit down, spend an afternoon in a classroom, preferably on site at one of these schools.
Box of bagels and some coffee.
Yeah, get you some donuts. And you work out things like where you want the ambulances to stage and which police chief is the incident commander. And it costs you nothing to walk the hallways with senior school staff and learn the doors in the hallways and which rooms touch which rooms and which ones have adjoining doors, where the cameras are, how to log into them. And you should probably do that on a fairly regular interval, right? I don't know, yearly, twice a year, once a quarter. It depends on your agency, depends on your job. But if you're not doing that, you're probably messing up.
And that's all true, but I just also want to point out that fundamentally this could happen at a post office, in any workplace. It could happen at the mall. It can happen somewhere you haven't been. It could happen somewhere you don't remember because you did it. You did this once 9 years ago, and yeah, doing it periodically is helpful. But what you really need is to make sure that you have that kind of problem-solving mindset, and that every time you happen to go to school for something other than the formal tabletop exercise or whatever, you're like peeking at doors. Like, how would I get through that? Like, what if that looks like a difficult situation to manage. Like, how would I do this? How would I do that? Like, you need to have that attitude everywhere you go, because like we say all the time, you don't get to pick the day on this, right? And it's easy for the bosses who only go to meetings and stuff all day to maybe get together in a conference room and like game this. But I need everyone to wrap their head around the fact that like you might be the incident commander when you show up there first and you're by yourself and it's all you. Like,
yeah. And by the way, it does no good if all this shit lives in a binder in the school that's being attacked.
Yeah. Or back at the station. Right? If it's just in a binder that's dusty and it's from like 1995, it's probably time to update it. It's probably time to get it on everyone's phones, right? So you can refresh, do you have the school floor plan on everybody's phones? If not, why not? Let's fix that. Okay. When I talk to friends in education, I am sometimes surprised at how seriously they are interested in corralling the parents. They see that as kind of their role, which sometimes they have a role in and sometimes the police handle. And that might sound secondary to the mission here, which is one of the reasons it surprises me, because I don't want to have a reunification. I want to kill the bad guy and send everyone home. But there were some pretty heated exchanges at Uvalde between the parents and the cops on the perimeter. They got real heated, in fact. And on social media, there was some discussion. If the cops were as aggressive about controlling the active killer as they were about keeping mom and dad out, it might have ended better. Now, is that fair to the cops? No. But maybe.
But if I'm mom and dad, I'm not in the mood to be fair to the cops that moment, right? But it also really wasn't a good look when the details trickled out and we saw cops working up the escalation ladder on the perimeter with mom and dad. At the same time, we saw other cops with sheepdog patches on their body armor standing in the hallway checking their cell phones with their thumbs up their asses. Okay. That said, you do need to control the scene, and we have discussed in other cases how like randos will show up to things like this, sometimes even armed randos, and they've acted a lot like suspects. That happened, I think, even at Columbine. They had like randos in trench coats with guns. But we've also talked recently about how police and armed bystanders got together and put down the UT Austin tower shooter. So consider you might be able to leverage the people who show up, like make them part of your solution and not part of your problem. One thing you can do on the parental corralling is run some training up front with the parents. Gosh, isn't that crazy? Instead of treating parents like the enemy, treat them like they're part of your team and part of your community and like do that community policing thing that I keep hearing about. There's an organization called the I Love You Guys Foundation. And it focuses on resources for schools and specifically on the reunification part of the process. They include a handout that parents get at the beginning of the school year. It talks about what to expect should the school have to do a controlled release for reunification. And that process is obviously tricky and foreign, even if you have the best possible outcome, which you may not. This is another area where the police, the school district, the stakeholder, the helping agencies all need to sit down and figure out who does what. And by the way, you can incorporate the teachers and you can incorporate the parents. And in some cases, you can incorporate the kids, right? If everyone has a common operating picture of like, this is what normal is supposed to look like, make sure you bring your ID because it's not going to be the teachers releasing them. It's going to be some district staffer who has never met you before, and they got to see your driver's license and your custody papers before they release. That's good to know before you show up screaming like, "Where's my baby? Where's my baby?" Right? That's training and discussion that doesn't cost much at all. That when we're having the worst day of our lives, we can make sure it goes a little bit smoother. That's our goal. Make it go smooth for us and make it go really, really bad for the bad guy. And we got to stack the deck, and we got to start doing it now. I think that's all I got.
Same. I obviously want to honor the victims in this, and I am empathetic to the difficult challenges that a lot of agencies face when it comes to getting good training, good staffing, good resources, good equipment. And I know this is like a niche thing, right? Like this is not something that every agency deals with every day. Where are they spending their money? Like we could spend thousands of dollars on breaching tools and breaching training, but like we're just trying to get our guys in cars that run and don't break down, you know? So it is a small problem set. I get that it's a fringe thing, right? But it is a very emotional thing. And I just want to make sure that we're balancing like honoring the victims. Yes. Showing empathy for the people, the guys that want to do the right thing, but they're not very well prepared or equipped to. And a lot of times it's not their fault. Sometimes it is their fault. Sometimes, yeah, you need to probably take initiative and get out to the range and do your physical fitness stuff and some of that on your own, and don't expect your agency to do that for you. But a lot of times it's well-intended people that just don't know any better, and they don't have the exposure or the experience to know any better. And so I want to help them, right? And so my effort here is to be empathetic to those responders, but also in a practical way that honors the victims by saying like, hey, these are some considerations to think about. There's a lot of grant money out there. If you are an agency that is looking for help for grant stuff to find money for this sort of thing, reach out to us. I will try to leverage my network the best I can to point you in the direction. I can't make any promises, obviously, but there is money out there, and you just got to ask for it. In a lot of cases, we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, right? Not add to the body count.
It costs very little to go take a walk at the school. It costs very little to go have a conversation with the school district. It costs very little to have a tabletop exercise or command post exercise. Even in a resource-constrained environment, you can do those things.
For sure. That's all I got.
All right. Be safe out there. Be smart out there.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours in the heat, wearing body armor, carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to find it for you. This episode is also brought to you by 09 Holsters. We talk a lot about people, ideas, and hardware on this show, so when we invest in equipment, we always think in terms of experience first. 09 is helping you figure out how to carry the gear you need to be effective. They are built by cops, for cops, with a minimalist design and bomb-proof durability. Radio cases, flashlights, body cameras, even canine remotes, you name it, 09 has been filling a void in tactical duty holsters for more than a decade. Go see what they offer at 09 Holsters, that's ZERO, the number 9, holsters.com. 09, built to win the fight. Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And one last thing, our Facebook discussion group. We've got a little group going on Facebook. If you go to the groups tab on our page, you can join it. We've got more followers on our page than we have in the group. So I know there's some of you out there following the Facebook page that are on Facebook that are not in the group. Lots of like-minded people in there. So come hang out with us. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.